Where did this climbing all start? In Dartmouth or Harvard, or where were you? And when were you? When?
Well, I guess it started in the White Mountains back about 1918. My father was a professor who wrote books in the summer, and so we'd go away in the summer from Philadelphia, where I grew up, and the White Mountains were a place I just loved to be out in the woods and the lowlands and get up as high as I could. And so for 2 years I did a lot of tramping around in the mountains, and then I didn't really do much of any until I got to college. And a classmate of mine there turned out to be Bradford Washburn.
Harvard.
At Harvard.
And let's establish the White Mountains are basically in New Hampshire.
They're in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
That's the best part of New Hampshire.
Okay.
So
you went to Harvard.
Wild country. Went to Exeter 2 years. Went to Harvard, and 4 years there. Met Brad Washburn at Harvard, who already had had 2 years of climbing in the Alps, good climbing with good guides. And his freshman year, he took a group to Alaska to try to make the first ascent of Mount Fairweather. Now, about that time, I got into the Harvard Mountaineering Club. A former classmate of mine at Exeter introduced me to Brad. We hit it off right away, and the three of us used to go up to Mount Washington every weekend. And in those days, nobody went up there in the winter, so we would have the mountain pretty much to ourselves. We'd go outside the cabin where Joe Dodge had his place, the one caretaker the Appalachian Mountain Club had up there. We'd put a tent down, throw a couple of pieces of wood, chunks of wood out of his wood pile, tie the guys to them, and unroll our sleeping bags, spend the night, and we'd be off in the morning on snowshoes in those days, on snowshoes up the fire trail on Mount Washington.
What were the sleeping bags made of then?
They were wool sleeping bags. Yeah. They were not mummy shaped. They were
Army issue or
square. And the first sleeping bag I ever had, I took up, this is before I met Brad, it was a Sears Roebuck sleeping bag that I bought, which was, had a wool inner, but the kapok on the inside. One of my brother's roommates and I went up to Mount Katahdin and spent the winter, spent the weekend working on the mountain. We climbed up, nobody else was there. We climbed up the Chimney Pond Cathedral Trail to the top. It began to pour that night. We didn't get down very far, camped in the saddle, and in the morning when I woke up, my companion was laughing his head off. I said, "What's the matter?" He said, You're blue all over here, like one of those old Saxons with his woad." Well, what had happened, the blue interior of the sleeping bag had all come out in the rain, and I was blue from head to foot. Anyway.
Now, where is this mountain?
Mount Katahdin is the highest mountain in Maine.
In Maine, okay.
And it's, it and Mount Washington are the two first places in the east where weather hits, wind comes in.
And what Mount Washington is recorded.
Mount Washington is higher, 6,300.
Yeah, but one of the coldest places in America ever.
They're both cold.
Yeah. Okay, so what was your first big move? Mr. Washburn was going to Alaska, so where did you go?
Well, he was going back to Alaska because they didn't get very far that summer. They learned a lot, killed a lot of mosquitoes, never got really near Mount Fairweather.
Mount Fairweather is almost an oxymoron, is a name for a mountain in Alaska anyway, isn't it? Who came up with, I wonder who named that?
It was named by the Frenchman who was coasting along and saw it under good weather. It's one of the biggest mountains in the world near the coast, very near the coast, and 15,300, good sized peak. Well, in 1932, we went in there to climb it. We couldn't land in the lakes where we hoped to land near the mountain, found that there was going to be a tremendous long pack in. So we picked the second highest mountain. Fairweather had been climbed already. Mount Crillon had never been climbed. Nobody had tried it. And we took all summer to work our way into it. This is all unmapped country. And I learned a lot about backpacking, glacier travel, crevasses, avalanches
And
that
mosquitoes.
summer.
And mosquitoes.
Yes, and mosquitoes too. And we found a lake that wasn't on any map, which was very useful to us, because later on we were able to fly in and land on that lake. Well, we took a second crack at it in 1933, and at that time there were two other fellows on the expedition who became, with Brad, my best friends of 60 years. This was Adams Carver, who for about 30 years edited the American Alpine Journal, and Charlie Houston, who is has been the most famous person dealing with mountain medicine. He has books and articles and tremendous amount that he has written about mountain medicine. Well, that's 32, 33. 1934, I went through college, 1933. 1934, I took my MA, and at the end of that, I was offered a job at the University of Pennsylvania. Went down there in the fall of 1934, no jobs. There was a depression. We were 350 students short. So they said, but won't you stay and do some work towards a PhD, and we'll get you in next fall. Well, I stayed, didn't have any other job, didn't have any money, and along about the middle of November, Brad Washburn called me and said, you remember those mountains we saw up there to the north? Well, the National Geographic Society wants us to go in there and map them. Brad had been working at the Harvard Geographical Institute, learning to be a top surveyor, and he was an ideal person for the job. Well, he said, we'll go in the winter, we'll travel by dog team. Nobody's been in there before. We'll be landed somewhere in there. We don't know just where yet. He said, they don't pay anything, but they'll pay all expenses. I said, pay all expenses, yippee, I'm on, you're on. And so I took off about right after Christmas, wrote some papers very hurriedly to get my credits, and then took off with Ed Carter and a fellow named Harness Beardsley, landed in Skagway, went from there to a place called Carcross, short for Caribou Crossing, and from there we took a Fairchild 51 in to land on the Lacer. In order to land beyond the Alsek River, nobody knew at that time where the Alsek River ran, whether it came out. We knew it must come out in the Pacific, but weren't sure just where. And we didn't know what the glaciers were or the mountains were in this area. Anyway, we found mountains that had never been on any map, around 14,000 feet high, and glaciers, one glacier actually that went about 90 miles completion. This was the Hubbard Glacier. We knew it existed. We didn't know it was that big. And we found half a dozen glaciers that were major glaciers, several of them over 40 miles long. So every day we're in new country. Well, that was 1935. 1936, I did some work towards the PhD, went to England and worked there, and then got into the Alps for a bit. Met a fellow named David Robertson, who later was Mallory's son-in-law and the lifetime friend. And we did some climbing together. 1937, Brad found out that you could get in to a mountain called Mount Lucania, which was then the highest unclimbed mountain in North America. You could get in because there was a pilot who had flown the mail in South America, who, when the other people who had gone, other pilots who had gone down with him died, he came north, went to Alaska, managed to get a job flying a plane into a mountain where there's quite a lot of gold, and he flew the ore out. In the summer, there was no place to take off from in Valdez, no snow, so he bought an old cocktail bar, made a pair of stainless steel skis out of it, found that with the tide, 20-foot tide in Valdez, he could, when the tide was out, take off on the mudflats. There are about 600 feet of mudflats. Take off on those and land on the snow. And that's the way we got into Mount Lucania. There were supposed to be 4 of us, but the plane went into a crevasse, nosed in, and we had an awful job getting out. It took 5 days to get Bob Reeve out.
The bush pilot.
He threw all the tools out of his plane, took a ball-peen hammer, hammered the propeller to get a better pitch, and managed to get off. I won't go into the details. He just barely got off. And he wouldn't be back to see us again. So we were on our own. We managed to climb Mount Lucania because we figured that was the shortest way out to civilization. In order to get out, we had to go over not only Mount Lucania, but Mount Steele, 16,600, good-sized peak, and to go down a 8,000-foot ridge to the glacier below. And we didn't dare to take too much stuff, too much food down that. We were carrying we took out the floor of the tent, cut the guys off, and reduced our sleeping bag. We left one sleeping bag. When we first tried out going into one sleeping bag, we tried getting in the same way. Sleeping bags weighed about 12 pounds, and wet they were 20 pounds. We got in, but we stuck. We couldn't breathe. So we got out. Brad ripped the zipper out of the bottom end, and we took turns sleeping with the head out the bottom end, the head out the top end. And for the rest of our trip out, that's the way we slept. And we slept on our pack boards to save weight. We got down this ridge, went down. It took several days to get down to the Donjek Glacier. We got to it, and it was running pretty high, and we got washed off our feet trying to cross it. And so finally, we had looked for caches on the way. We knew that there were supposed to be 2 caches of food in between where we were and the Donjek River, but we couldn't find the first one, and the bears had found the second one ahead of us, and all that was left of what had been there was one little can of Peter Rabbit peanut butter. There wasn't anything else. So we were really cut down. Our only thing we had left were some dried baked beans. We had finished our bacon. we had some cornmeal, a few raisins, and we were down to that when we started going upriver on the Donjack. We went about 30 miles to get around where we were. First, we reached the Donjack Glacier. We thought the water from that started the river, but we found when we got there that the river started way, way farther up in the mountains. So we had quite a job getting across that river, one place where there's a braided stream. Got out beyond that, picked mushrooms. We weren't quite sure that they were all right, but I won't go into the details. Finally, we agreed to try them. We heard a squirrel chirping at us. Once we got on the other side of the river, I shot him with an old police revolver, which had belonged to one of the two fellows that never got in. It belonged to his grandfather, I think. We had about 10 shells. I got that squirrel. Actually, on the third shot, I hit the branch he was on, and he came down, and we grabbed him. So we had mushroom and squirrel, and we were getting pretty hungry. We woke up one morning, and here in the trail ahead of us is a big swamp rabbit. I shot him, and that helped us to get out, where we ran into some Indians and a Frenchman who were bringing the cash into a place for hunters.
But you still had to do the big mountain
We'd done it. Lucania we climbed on the way over.
on the way over.
You see, in order to get out of where we were left, we had to climb up from 8,000 to 17,000.
And back down.
And there's a plateau between Steele and Lucania. Actually, the plateau is a little over 14. Got up the plateau, climbed Mount Lucania, which is one end of the plateau, came the other direction, climbed Mount Steele, the other end of the plateau, and then started down this very steep ridge. Well, it took us some time to get out, but we made it. And that was 37. 38, I was asked to go to K2, yeah.
Let's take a break. Your prominence in the climbing community is from K2,
Oh, yes.
and you wrote a book.
I've written 4, actually.
Well, but
Yeah.
the
2 about K2.
I'm reaching here, but I'm
Right.
thinking it's Savage Mountain. Is
So,
that-
yes, K2, the Savage Mountain.
Yeah.
The first one, I'm going over to England on Tuesday to talk about another book called 5 Miles High, which we did in 1939 after our 1938 expedition on K2. Nobody had been there for 40 years, so we had a brand new mountain to work on
Well, nobody had been there when you went there when?
in 1938.
In 1938, no one had been on K2 for how long?
Well, since really 1909, they had been there. That's 1909
The
to
British?
1938. No, this is the Italians, it's the Duca di Abruzzi.
Oh, Abruzzi was, okay.
We named the chief of the main ridge, which we finally were able to climb. We named that the Abruzzi Ridge for.
You and Dr. Houston and that.
Well,
that group?
there were 5 of us climbers. This is 1938.
So you were the ones who named it the Abruzzi Ridge.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, we found it. I mean, it took us. Our instructions were in 1938. Our instructions were to go to K2, find some route up it and climb as high as we wanted, but come back safely, and make preparations so that in the next year an expedition could go over and climb it. Nobody thought we could possibly reconnoiter it and climb it in 1 year. Before we went, we didn't know much about K2. We knew about the book that the Duke of Abruzzi had written about it in 1909, a very good book, as a matter of fact. And we knew about Sella's photographs. Sella was a famous Italian photographer, one of the most famous that the world has known. And we went to the American Alpine Club, picked up a wastebasket, inverted it, and put Sella's pictures, sizable pictures, around it so we could look at the mountain on all sides. We couldn't, our collective agreement after we'd done this was that they ought to put in another ridge somewhere because we couldn't see any route on it. And when we got out there, it took a commitment of 6 months to go. 1 month to get to India, 1 month to walk 350 miles into the mountain, and 6 weeks on the mountain to try to make the climb. So basically 6 months in all. We got our stuff out there.
Because K2 is in Pakistan.
What's that?
K2 is in Pakistan.
K2 is on the border between what was then India and China. It was part of India at the time we went out in 38.
Oh, okay.
When
Thank you for correcting me.
another American expedition tried it in 1939. The leader, Fritz Wiesner, was very highly motivated. He got slightly higher than we did, almost climbed the mountain, but he had a lot of bad luck and a little bad judgment. And make a long story short, one of the Americans and 3 local Sherpas that we had were killed during the expedition.
During your expedition?
This was not ours.
No,
this
the Wiesner.
This is the next year. Wiesner's in 1939. Okay. The mountain, nobody was allowed on the mountain because of World War II until 1953. And all through the war, we've been talking about getting back to it. 1953, we were Johnny on the spot and got permission immediately to go in there to have a second expedition. With a strong party, we drew it from lots of applicants in the American Alpine Club, and to make a long story short, we followed the same route, but we got into a tremendous storm up not much higher than we'd been in 1938. In fact, it's a long story. Snow, wind, we were absolutely pinned down by a storm. One tent was ripped and the 2 men in it were luckily able to get into other tents. We had to pin down our tents with ice axes so they keep them from being blown off the mountain. Couldn't go outside because the weather was absolutely horrendous, very, very high winds and cold. We finally, one man came down with thrombophlebitis. He had, the blood gets very thick at high altitudes, and he tried to get out of the tent, collapsed, fainted, and anyway, this is what we found was his trouble. We tried to take him down. Pieces of clot were breaking off and getting into his heart. We were afraid he'd die unless we could get him lower. he certainly would have. We could not go the way we came up because of avalanche danger, acute avalanche danger. So we tried a gully that we had not been on before to try to get around the avalanche danger. And again, what happened, we were extremely cold. One man whose feet were frozen slipped, pulled off. The rest of us who were at that moment were moving, and one man, Pete Schoening, who was belaying the injured man we were trying to bring down, held all 5 of us who fell. It was a most remarkable belay, and of course we were all pretty well shaken. We were very cold. Charlie Houston, who was the leader of the party, was out, knocked out, had a concussion. Others were somewhat hurt, but we managed to get out of the gully, get some tents up, survived that night, and had a hard time getting down off the rest of this big, very big mountain because of the intensity of the storm. The intensity dropped as we went down, but it was still hard until we got to base camp. Well, that's my second K2 expedition.
And what happened? Who was the person who had
Art Kilkey. It was a person with thrombophlebitis. While we were getting the 5 people who fell out of the gully to some kind of safety where we could start putting up tents, an avalanche came along. The storm was making so much noise we never heard it. But we came back to look, and there was nothing there. No ice axes. He'd been pinned to 2 ice axes. No ice axes. No sign that anybody ever been there. Just swept clean by the avalanche. We had a hard time getting down. We did get down, and 40 years later, almost to the day, they found Art's body, what was left of it, on the glacier. Well, after that, I did a little more climbing in Alaska and the Yukon, and in the Tetons, also with Nick Clinch, went to a mountain that Eric Shipton told us about in China that was on the maps as nearly 26,000 feet high in an area where there are no other high mountains. We expected to go in there on a reconnaissance with camels, as it had been done back in 1894, but we had no chance to do that. The Chinese were controlling things, and they finally gave us permission to go in. We went in by trucks. We found the mountain was considerably lower than that, about 23,000 feet high, and ours was the first joint Chinese-American expedition.
what year?
The climb was made. That was 1985.
Mr. Bates, let's go back to K2 for a minute. You were a pioneer as you did a remarkable thing.
Well, it was quite a climb.
What are your reflections today on?
Well, the main thing is the wonderful people I was with, both climbs. This to me is as much of an appeal, the people that you're with trying to work all together for one thing. We didn't care who got to the top. We wanted to get to the top. That was the idea. We wanted to get to the top because they had said that those high mountains could never be climbed. We'd had a lot of experience in Alaska, especially with ice and snow, and we thought that we could probably climb as well as the Everest people who had been climbing, and English climbers been climbing on Everest, and we wanted to give it a try. And we gave it a good try, and we went high enough so that we were sure it could be climbed. 3 times we went over 20,000 feet and were stopped. The 4th time we went beyond and kept going beyond and kept going beyond. Bill House and I think made the toughest climb. I know we did on the reconnaissance, was to climb what's now known as the House Chimney, which he led. I had a very poor belay for him, but that was all it was.
If I recall, the K2, The Savage Mountain, which you authored, which I read many years ago, isn't there a picture in there of the reunion of your group in Colorado someplace? Didn't your expedition group get together years later? You're talking about.
Oh yes, we did.
Isn't there a picture of your? Didn't you?
Oh, probably on the back page, or back cover.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
there is a picture of us getting together.
And who's still alive of that group?
Who is still alive?
No.
Except for Art Gilkey, we're all alive.
You're all alive, aren't you?
Oh, well, our transport officer, who was a good deal older, who was from Pakistan.
But all the
died.
Americans
All the Americans, with the
who
exception,
came down alive
with
are
Art.
still alive today.
That's right.
That's incredible.
Well,
That all that
we're a
good,
pretty healthy bunch.
pretty well. You obviously you're.
I'm the
Time-
oldest.
You're the danger in K2 and the terrible thing in that miraculous belay
All right.
by Pete was something. But I've seen enough of Alaska that your time up there in Alaska, you could have faced if you hadn't had that revolver, it'd taken quite a few rocks to get in that squirrel, right?
Yes.
So danger was not a new thing to you young
Oh,
men.
Lord, no. Oh, no. Well, we figure if you know what you're doing, if you had quite a little experience, depend on yourself. And don't depend on anybody else to get you out. We never had any backup. We never had any doctors or weather information or
Helicopters?
no way of letting people know we're all right or all wrong.
Yeah. But so it was, and nothing's changed about that.
Nothing's changed.
No.
Well,
You have to it's still yourself and your own will to survive and to
sure.
use good judgment.
Well, next week I'm going over and giving a talk about 1939, the book called 5 Miles High, which they're reprinting.
Good.
That hadn't been reprinted since '39.
Well, congratulations and thanks for doing this for me.